Overview. GPWS is designed to give both oral and visual warnings when the safety of the aircraft is considered to be at risk due to possible conflict with terrain. During an approach, oral warning of radio altitude and the decision height are also provided by the GPWS. Central to the GPWS is a Ground Proximity Warning Computer, GPWC, which receives signals from various aircraft systems to produce 6 modes of warning. Visual commands are provided by pull-up annunciators on the glare shield. Switches are available to modify the GPWS for abnormal land flap and steep approaches. A GPWS inoperative annunciator is situated on the central status panel. Warning modes. 5 modes are provided to protect the aircraft throughout all modes of flight. Excessive descent rate with respect to terrain. Excessive closure to terrain. Loss of altitude after takeoff or go-around. Unsafe terrain clearance with respect to phase of flight. Excessive descent below glide slope. An additional mode provides radio altitude callouts, decision height alerting and bank angle alerting during approach. The modes are accompanied by an appropriate oral warning transmitted over both loudspeakers and the aircrew's headsets. Modes 1 to 4 are accompanied by a red pull-up annunciator on each glare shield. Each mode is defined by an envelope which is stored within the Ground Proximity Warning Computer, GPWC. The envelope can be regarded as a graph of minimum terrain clearance against other aircraft parameters. Different levels of warning are provided by dividing the envelope into more than one area. When the aircraft penetrates each area of the envelope, a specific warning is given. The warnings cease when that envelope has been exited. Envelope modification may also be made in respect to other parameters such as gear position, flap position, or airspeed. Mode 1. Excessive descent rate. Mode 1 protects against excessive rates of descent close to the ground. Vertical speed from IRS-1 is compared with radio altitude to produce the following envelope. If vertical speed from IRS-1 is not available, then rate of barometric altitude from ADC-1 is used. If the envelope is penetrated, the oral warning sink rate is given and the pull-up warning light on the glare shield illuminates until the envelope is left.
Sink rate.
If descent continues and the inner envelope is penetrated, the oral warning whoop whoop pull-up is given.
Pull up.
It can be seen that the pull-up warning occurs at a higher radio altitude for higher descent rates. This is designed to provide sufficient response time for the pilot to recover. steep approach switch. The steep approach switch may be fitted as a customer option to modify the warning envelope to prevent the nuisance warnings associated with descent on a glide slope with an angle greater than 4.5 degrees. Pressing this switch arms the system and provides a white steep approach indication. When the landing gear is selected down and the flaps are selected to 33 degrees, a green steep approach illuminates to indicate that the envelope is modified. After pressing the steep approach button, when is the steep approach function engaged? Mode 2. Terrain closure rate. Mode 2 is divided into two sub-modes and provides protection against rising terrain. Mode 2A. The rate of reduction of radio altitude is compared to radio altitude to produce the following warning envelope, which is valid when land flap is not selected or the aircraft is not established on the ILS. When the envelope is penetrated, the oral warning "Terrain" is issued and "Pull-up" illuminates. If the aircraft is still in the envelope after two warnings, "Whoop whoop pull-up" is issued.
Terrain. Terrain. Pull up.
In order to increase response time to rapidly rising terrain at high air speeds, the envelope is increased for speeds between 220 knots and 310 knots, therefore providing a warning with a greater terrain clearance. Mode 2B. During an approach, with either the flaps in the landing configuration or with the aircraft established on an ILS, the envelope is modified to allow passage over hilly terrain without triggering a warning. The warnings given are the same as Mode 2A. Mode 3. Excessive altitude loss after takeoff or go-around. Mode 3 protects against the aircraft sinking towards terrain during the acceleration phase after takeoff and during a go-around. The inertial altitude signal from IRS number 1 and the radio altitude are compared to detect altitude loss. When approximately 10% of the gained altitude is lost after takeoff or during a go-around, the oral warning "Don't sink" is given, and pull-up illuminates until recovery is initiated.
Don't think.
Mode 4. Unsafe terrain clearance. Mode 4 protects against insufficient clearance with the ground when the aircraft is not descending sufficiently to trigger a Mode 1 warning, or when the ground is not rising sufficiently to trigger a Mode 2 warning. Warnings are also given for flaps and gear not being in the correct position before landing. The Mode 4 warning envelope is based on radio altitude against airspeed. Sub-modes of Mode 4 are also dependent on gear position and flap position. Mode 4A. Mode 4A is active in the cruise and approach phases of flight with the landing gear up. Above 190 knots, the warning is too low terrain. Below 190 knots, the warning is too low gear. Both warnings are accompanied by the pull-up annunciator.
Too low terrain. Too low gear.
Mode 4B. Mode 4B is active in the cruise and approach phases, with the landing gear down and the flaps not set for landing. Above 159 knots, the warning is too low terrain. Below 159 knots, the warning is too low flaps. Both warnings are accompanied by the pull-up annunciator.
Too low terrain. Too low flaps.
Flap 2433 selection switch. This switch is provided as a customer option and is used to define the landing flap setting for the GPWS, either flap 24 or 33. The switch defaults to 33. The too low flap call-out will be provided when a landing is attempted at any flap selection other than 33. Selection of 24 provides a too low flap call-out when a landing is attempted at a flap setting of 0 or 18. Flap warn override. The GPWS flap warn override switch is provided to inhibit the too low flap warning, which is given when attempting to land at a flap setting lower than the landing flap selection. Note, the switch is guarded by a transparent cover. Mode 4C. Mode 4C is designed to protect the aircraft from terrain rising at a faster rate than the aircraft is climbing after takeoff. In order to increase the response time at airspeeds above 250 knots, an extension to the envelope is made in a similar manner to Mode 2A. Radio altitude is sampled after takeoff. If it reduces below a computed threshold, the warning "Too low terrain" is issued and accompanied by the pull-up warning.
Too low terrain.
Mode 5. Deviation below glideslope. This mode is designed to give protection to aircraft deviating below the glideslope of an ILS and is enabled at a radio altitude of 1,000 feet. When the aircraft is lower than 1.3 dots fly-up, the soft warning "Glideslope" is issued, which is at a reduced volume than the normal GPWS alert.
Glideslope.
The pull-up warning does not appear in Mode 5. Below 300 feet, with a glideslope deviation greater than 2 dots fly-up, a warning of "Glideslope" at normal volume, a hard warning, is given. The repetition rate of "Glideslope" increases as radio altitude decreases below 1,000 feet, and glideslope deviation increases above 1.3 dots.
Glideslope. Glideslope. Glideslope.
The envelope is modified below 150 feet radio altitude to permit normal deviations during landing. The glideslope warning may be cancelled at any time below 1,000 feet radio altitude by pressing the GPWS GP Inhibit button on the glare shield.
Glideslope. Glideslope. Glideslope.
Should a go-around be performed after the mode has been inhibited, the mode will be reset when the aircraft climbs above 1,000 feet radio altitude, ready for the next approach. Mode 6. Altitude callouts and minimums. The following radio altitude callouts are given: 500, 100, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Decision height is selectable on the EFIS dimming panel between 0 feet and 500 feet. When the aircraft descends below the decision height, the warning minimums is given.
$100. Minimums: 40, 30, 20, 10.
As a customer option, the warning bank angle is enabled with the following warning envelope. The warning is given whenever 40 degrees bank angle is exceeded. Below 150 feet, the warning area expands linearly to provide a warning at 10 degrees bank angle down to 30 feet radio altitude. The pull-up warning does not appear in Mode 6. How much altitude must be lost after takeoff to trigger a "Don't Sink" warning? When can the glide slope warning be cancelled? Warning priority. An order of message priority exists as follows. However, if a message has started transmission, it will not be interrupted by a message of a higher priority. All of the GPWS warnings have a higher priority than TCAS, but are below wind shear. System test. The system test is divided into a short and a long test sequence. Both sequences are initiated by pressing either of the pull-up annunciators on the glare shield. The following short test sequence is issued when the button is pressed and then released.
Glideslope. Pull up.
The short test sequence may be initiated on the ground or in the air above 1,000 feet radio altitude. The long test sequence is issued by keeping the test button pressed through the short test sequence until sync rate is heard, and then releasing the button. The system then goes through the following sequence.
Glideslope. Pull up. Sync rate. Pull up. Terrain. Pull up. Don't think. Too low. Terrain. Too low. Gear. Too low. Flaps. Too low. Terrain. Glideslope. Minimums: 500, 100, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
The long test sequence can only be performed on the ground. System operation. If the pull-up annunciators illuminate when the aircraft is in flight, it must be assumed that the aircraft is in dangerous proximity to the ground. Pull up to place the aircraft in the optimum climb attitude and push the thrust levers fully forward. Either of the toga buttons on the front of thrust levers 2 and 3 must be pressed. This places the Flight Director Autopilot and the TRP in the go-around mode. The aircraft's airspeed and configuration can then be adopted for the optimum climb gradient. GPWS failure. With the failure of GPWS, a white GPWS inoperative annunciator illuminates on the central status panel. Because number 1 radio altimeter is required for all GPWS modes, performing a number 1 radio altimeter test, which invalidates its output, causes the GPWS inoperative to illuminate. Which aircraft system failure causes the GPWS inoperative annunciator to illuminate? Which of the GPWS modes only produce an oral warning? Which warning is heard if the aircraft is straight and level, radio altitude is 600 feet, airspeed is 180 knots, landing gear up, flaps selected to 24 degrees, and there is no rising terrain?